I'm just really happy to have this opportunity to be able to present to you. But before I start, I really want to figure out who's here in the room and what your role is with Dress for Success. If everyone could please introduce yourself.
I'll go first. Hi, I'm Bianca. I'm the donation.
Sorry, just for a second. Lauren dropped off the call. Sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm connected now. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, as I said, if you could just introduce yourself and let me know the role that you play in Dress for Success before I start my presentation.
I'm Bianca. I'm the donation and volunteer coordinator at Dress for Success.
Linda Iverson. I'm a volunteer at Dress for Success.
Hi, this is just the beginner volunteer.
Volunteer.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm the director here at Dress for Success. It's nice to meet you all.
Okay, nice to meet everybody too. Thank you all for introducing yourself. Well, we've got a lot of volunteers for this program. That's great. It's great that you're giving back to the community. That's exciting. Yeah, I did check your website before I did this presentation. I see everything that you do, that you advocate for women and help them feel ready and confident to go to job interviews and get a permanent job. So I'm really excited to be part of your organization and give this presentation. I will go ahead and share my screen now as I go through the presentation. At the same time, I'll be setting you up on the profile on the side so that if you do have questions or comments, just go ahead and feel free to put on the raise your hand button and I can answer those. So before I start, I'd like to ask everybody, have you ever met a person who is deaf or deafblind? I'm getting some head nods. And if anyone had to work with them, a deaf or deafblind person. So do you feel that every deaf person has the same experience? I'd just like to know your perspective, because as you can see that there's a variety of people who are deaf and their level that they can hear. Some people are completely deaf, can hear basically nothing, and others can hear sound. Some can hear from the left side, but not from the right side. For example, myself, I'm actually hard of hearing. On my left side, I can hear pretty well, but on the right side, I'm completely deaf. So I was born and raised, and I went to a deaf school. My mother is deaf, and my father is an American Sign Language interpreter. So I was raised with deaf culture as part of my growing up, and identify myself as a deaf person. But really, I can hear on my left side. So, you know, I'm kind of in between deaf and hard of hearing, but I don't use my voice. I don't use my voice. I use American Sign Language because that's my first language to communicate. Mm-hmm. So when I meet other deaf people or hard of hearing people, it's very different. They have very different life stories to mine. So perhaps they grew up and they might have learned to speak or use hearing aids or other assistive devices. There's just a variety of stories of how people have gone through life. So before I go any further, I wanted to share 7 things to know about deaf and hard of hearing people. So the first one is, very important one, is, sorry, I got a message. Sorry, I can't see the chat because it's so small because I'm sharing my screen. But if you have something you want to say immediately, then you can just get yourself off mute and the interpreter will interpret. So number one, just really important, like if you're in a store and you open the door and you expect people to say thank you, and usually hear people say thank you, but sometimes a deaf person, they don't know you've said that and you're expecting that, or they don't see that you're not looking at them. They want to maybe say thank you in a visual way, and you might think that they are rude. That's happened to me so much that I know it's just easy just to assume that people are rude if they didn't say thank you, but really maybe they are deaf. So a deaf people, they use eye contact to communicate. So they might nod or say thank you in sign language. If a hearing person looks at me, I will sign thank you to them if they have moved their eyes towards me, but otherwise they don't realize. And I know sometimes people are talking to me in the store and I don't realize they're talking to me. I'm just doing my shopping. And I realize that these people are making comments. So it's easy for people to assume that I'm ignoring them or rude, and it's just that I don't hear them. So just keep that number one in the back of your mind. And number two is every deaf person has their own preferred methods of communication and language. So as I mentioned, my first language is American Sign Language. So for me, I prefer to have an American Sign Language interpreter. If I'm going to a big conference or a big speech or meeting, I prefer to have an interpreter. But for other deaf people, they might prefer a CART, which is like a closed captioning system. Or they might want to use a smartphone to communicate. There's really such a variety of the way people communicate. There's not one systematic way that everyone follows. Also, deaf, blind people or hard of hearing people, they might have their own way of communicating. So it's important to see if you can figure that out before you assist them. Third is some deaf people may not identify themselves as deaf. And the reason that is that they were brought up differently. So they were brought up and they didn't learn sign language. And they were born and they might have used hearing aids or a cochlear implant. And they did speech training growing up. And so that they feel like they are more hearing. And they're just, they don't identify themselves as being deaf. And then maybe later in life, some of those same individuals might realize that, oh, they feel different. And then when they learn sign language, then they feel more connected to the deaf community and realize that they identify themselves later in life as deaf. But some may never change their identity. They grow up and they socialize with hearing people and they're not around with other deaf people. And even though they are physically deaf, they don't identify as being deaf. So that's another thing to keep in mind too. There's really, it has a lot to do with their upbringing and their family situation. And if you know that, you might be able to give them the support better. So like I said, my mother is deaf. So automatically, as soon as I was born, I was part of the deaf culture and I had the deaf identity. And when I was raised, I went to a deaf school and I graduated, and the only university for the deaf in the world I went to. So that I have such a strong deaf identity inside of me. So when I meet other people, I notice that they are very different because their upbringing was different than mine was. I mean, it's all acceptable and we really accept each other, but there are differences. So the fourth point is social situations and environments may be different for deaf individuals. So I can't speak for all deaf people, but I will speak for myself. when I moved here, I'm obviously not from Hawaii. I'm from Massachusetts, and my life story is quite long. But I've worked. I worked in the Marshall Islands for 3 years before moving here 4 years ago. So about 7 years in the Pacific Islands. So when I moved here to Hawaii, I didn't socialize much with the deaf community because my boyfriend can hear and he is from here and his family is all hearing and all of his friend network is hearing. So I was hanging out with all of them. And then I noticed I would get nervous and it was really hard for me to communicate and hard to understand them. So and what was also worse is that then of course we had the mask mandates, and so I couldn't understand anybody. It was, you know, with lip reading I could catch a little bit, but with masks on and everyone talking, it was really hard to follow the conversation for me. And what made it worse is then I just got more and more anxious about it. Then over time, it got better and better. And one of those reasons was my boyfriend's friend, his family knew that I was deaf. So they tried to learn some sign language and they tried to learn my way of communicating. So one person would talk at a time and they tried to learn a little basic sign language, and it made me feel more at ease. So my anxiety. Okay, can you? Sorry, I think that was me. I think. um, all right, are we back up? I hope. So, as I was saying, my anxiety was reduced because of that. And there are a lot of different various environments, social events that deaf people might go to. Deaf people who know sign language can communicate with. So if there's a lot of hearing people in a situation that they go to, if there's going to be a lot of hearing people that don't know sign language, that could be quite stressful for a deaf person. So even as a child, you know, they can get overwhelmed for like if a deaf child is in a room with all hearing people. So it's just important, I guess, for hearing people to, you know, learn some basic sign language and have a way to engage with them, a deaf person, a deaf blind person, or a hard of hearing person. And this fifth, as I've been saying, no two deaf people are alike. We are quite different. And again, it's just important to be aware and ask them, what is their communication preference? Do they need an interpreter? Some of them can speak for themselves, and some prefer to do that. So there's just a wide variety. So number 6 is deaf people, they don't consider themselves disabled. They feel that they are normal. They can do anything. They can go to work, they can drive, they can pay their bills, they can just do anything. They really feel that they don't want to be labeled as disabled. So often you find that. You have some deaf people with other disabilities. You do have people deaf plus, we call them sometimes. So they are deaf as well as have other disabilities like physical limitations, or they are deaf with and deaf blind or visual impairments. So there are people that have other disabilities like cerebral palsy, for example. They are deaf as well as have cerebral palsy. So some of those deaf people consider themselves disabled, and they call themselves deaf plus. So it's just it's a little bit complex, but I'm trying my best to try to describe the whole community. Again, I can't speak for everybody and how they label themselves, but I'm just trying to explain that there are different perspectives, and other deaf people, they might call themselves deaf plus or deaf and disabled. This number 7, it's very common for hearing people to sort of encourage deaf people saying, why don't you use a hearing aid? Really, it's a very personal choice. Some deaf people feel like it's not helpful anyway. The hearing aid doesn't help, that the signal like goes to the nerve and it doesn't really pick up the sound. So a lot of people have varying levels of hearing. So for children, parents usually encourage them to wear their hearing aids or cochlear implants, and that's very common to see. So it's important just to look at the child and see if the child seems okay with wearing the hearing aid, and then that's okay. But if the child seems to be irritated and doesn't want to wear the hearing aid, maybe the hearing aid makes it too loud, or they don't want to communicate. So it's really a personal choice. Some people receive cochlear implants as an infant, and then later in life, they decide to not use them. Some are health related because they can get infected, or they can get swelling in the site, or they don't work, or there's various reasons why they might want to have it removed. So that's 7 things to know about deaf and hard of hearing people. Now, the next topic I want to talk about is the spectrum of deafness. And as I said before, that there's quite a variety. And Coda, sorry, someone wanted to say something? Oh, sorry, is there any questions before I move on to the next portion? Okay, CODA means child of deaf adult. For example, my brother, he can hear, and he is a CODA because my mother is deaf. So my brother grew up learning sign language, and he has deaf culture as part of his heritage too. But we also have deaf blind people, and then late deafened adult, meaning that they lost their hearing later in life. Or sometimes that they lose their hearing young. A degeneration can sort of happen, but they learn sign language and they start to identify as a deaf individual. There's also hard of hearing. And those people all usually feel like in the middle between hearing and deaf world, going between the two. It really just depends on how they were raised. Like me, I'm hard of hearing, but I was raised as a deaf person and I have that identity. So there is still a spectrum of deaf identities. And as well as that spectrum, there's a spectrum of visual impairment as well. This just gives you an idea of what like fully sighted can see versus totally blind. So it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller field of vision, till sometimes people have a very small field of vision, so they can see, but they can't see peripherally. So you need to tap them on the shoulder, and then they will turn their head to actually physically see you. Or you can ask the person what they would like. If they like a light on, sometimes the light helps, or sometimes the light makes it worse. So it's really, really hard for them to see. So you ask them exactly what they might prefer, so they can see better. So this is an idea of what blindness looks like. Again, this is related to lighting, and if your room has enough lighting, I see like Joanna, for example, like you're in the office, you have a whole lot of lighting on that. That's a very good amount of light. But it's important to ask the deaf blind person, you know, is the light good? Is it too much, or you need more? So you can ask them what they prefer. So how do you get a deaf person's attention? These are behavioral norms. So you can use a light switch, turning the lights on and off. Now, of course, you don't want to make it like a disco. You just do like a strobe light, you know, just 2-3 times. That'll get their attention. You can tap them on the shoulder gently, lightly on the shoulder. You can make eye contact with them and then speak with them. So this banging on the wall or table, that is also very normal. I know maybe people think that it's a bit rude, but it isn't in deaf culture. That is a way to get someone's attention because they can feel the vibrations through the floor or through the table. So another one too is you could wave. You could just do a visual thing like you wave in front of their field of vision so they can see. But these are all considered a normal behavior for deaf people. Now, sign language. Sign language it's just important to realize that facial expressions are part of American Sign Language. So the facial expressions have grammatical meanings included in them. So if my eyes are kind of squinted down, that means I might be asking a question. So that means it doesn't mean I'm mad, you know, or it could mean that just depending on the context. So some like you might say, what, and you'd squint your eyes, or who are you talking about? And they squint, people squint their eyes for that. But it's important for the person speaking to look, they'll be looking at your hands and the face, but they don't focus on the mouth. They take in the whole scenario of the person. So the question of what do deaf people value? I know it might be something that you might be wondering. Anybody have an answer? Any ideas? Light is something that they value. So when a room is very dark, it's very hard for them to see and have a conversation. So deaf people value light, so they can see and talk. Space. They value space so they can have a conversation. And we value networking because deaf people are scattered across the globe. So when they have a conference or there's a training that requires a lot of deaf people to go to, usually they end up huddling together and they like to network. It's quite valuable for them. They talk about their frustrations, their struggles, their accomplishments, their stories. They can share that with each other, resources as well. So they really value that to help them succeed in life. So now, do's and don'ts of good communication with a deaf person. So make sure that you have the person's attention before you start to speak. Make sure that they are looking at you. So if the deaf person is there with an interpreter, and so there's two people coming in the room, don't focus and look at the interpreter and say, hey, can you tell her or tell him? Instead, look directly to the person and say, can you this, that, whatever it is, and the interpreter will interpret the information. Also make sure that only one person in the room is talking at the same time, and that way the interpreter can be clear about what's said. It's normal for the deaf person to watch the interpreter, but also keep glancing back and forth to you. So I hope you don't think that it's rude that they keep diverting their eyes. That's how they get all the information. They're looking at the sign language as well as you speaking or getting your expressions. The next line here, you don't need to shout or over exaggerate your speech. It is actually not helpful. Just speak normally and regular. So the background noise, make sure that that's kept to a minimum. So that also the interpreter can hear, but if the person is hard of hearing, they might still be able to hear a little bit. So it'd be good to have background noise minimalized and have good lighting. Sometimes if you find yourself struggling to communicate, they're not understanding you and you're repeating yourself again and again, try changing how you're explaining it, or pointing, add pointing, or get a visual thing, maybe draw a picture or write something. So just change the way you are communicating and see if that is successful. And this one here says, don't ask if they can read lips. I know that people just assume that, oh, they should be able to read lips. That should be helpful. But really, it makes it harder for the deaf person, hard of hearing people even, because they have to work super hard to try to figure out what's being said. And like I said, with the masks on, it was so hard. So, you know, either use an interpreter or write back and forth, or you can text using a phone or type on a computer if there's not an interpreter there. There's a lot of these other ways you can use to communicate with a deaf person. And of course, you could just learn American Sign Language. So deaf people are really, they get so excited. It's really emotional for them if they feel that you've made an effort to learn. Now I'd like to talk about those who are blind or visually impaired or deafblind. So you can, as I was speaking about deaf people, they have various ways of communicating, similar with deafblind people and visually impaired people. Some haven't learned Braille. Some do learn, some are in the process of learning. Some prefer large print. Sometimes a smartphone or a whiteboard, interpreter using ASL. It's so different. Everyone, it has their own way of communicating. So it's best just to ask what they prefer. And if you do that, they feel appreciative that you've asked for them rather than assume what they need. So if you have a deaf, blind, or visually impaired person comes, you want to make sure that you identify yourself first. Maybe like explain what you look like because they can't see you. Like I have blonde hair with glasses and I'm wearing a black shirt with CSC on it. My name is Lauren. And just to explain my role, I work here at the CSC. And if you have to leave, just let them know, because they don't know what's going on. They don't see the peripheral things that happen in the room. Just let them know, hey, I'm heading out. And then they're like, oh, okay. Then they again feel appreciative that you've kept them in the loop. Again, just communication is the key, just so they know what's going on in their environment. Maybe you've already seen a deafblind person that they usually have a support service provider, SSP, a person that comes and assists them, and they are explaining to them and supporting them in explaining to them what's in the environment. But they are, you can also do that role as well if you are comfortable doing that. So you explain, you stand with them and you start with the left side. And then you explain what's on the right side, like, oh, on the left side is the clothing, on the right is the office, ahead of you is the dress room, like whatever your scenario is. But you just explain to the person where everything is around them. You can also say more detailed information in 5 feet, in 10 feet, so that they can feel that they have the ability to walk through the space by themselves. that they don't have to be dependent on another person. They can be independent. And if you've described where everything is, then they can be independent in the space. So sometimes they have like a backpack or a person, they bring something and then they put it down. And if you want to move it, just let them know, ask them. Just explain what you're doing and why you're moving it. Again, that they can't see that peripherally sometimes, so then they don't know what's happening. So just ask their permission when you do these things. If you move items, please let them know where you're moving them to. So never move it without communicating with that, because they rely on memory to know where things are. For example, there was a deafblind man who came in here today earlier, and I gave him a cup of water. And I had to hand it to him so that he could feel it. And then he set it down so that he knew where it was again. And I didn't touch it or move that water. If I moved it, then he would probably knock it over and spill the water. So he knew exactly where it was. And I knew not to touch it, so that a lot of people with visual impairments use memory as a way to figure out where things are. Sorry, there's a video. This is an interesting video. It's a couple minutes, a short video, but it's about protactile, which is a new sort of technique used for those who are deaf and blind. So when two deaf-blind people come together, this is a way they communicate. It's not through sign language, it's through tactile touch. It's the use of touch. And this will give you just a sense of what that looks like. I'll see if I can also turn on the captioning for this video. Sorry about that. I just wanted to give you an idea of what protactile looks like. So when a deaf-blind person comes in, you will notice that they have a support service provider and that they are communicating with them by touch. This is quite new. I'm still learning myself. I'm not well versed in it, but you ask the deaf blind person, there are some people that are learning how to communicate with these deaf-blind people. Also, these are vocabulary word choices. If just keep in the back of your mind when you can say deaf, that's okay. Deaf, blind, deaf, disabled, deaf plus, those are all appropriate terms. And then on the right column, please don't say these words, especially hearing impaired. It's a medical term that is used, but it's almost like saying, like, I call you signing impaired. It'd be the same if I did that. And it's like, what the heck? It's sort of deaf is just a better way to say it. Deaf, deaf blind, deaf disabled. Those are all appropriate terms to use. So, how do you create a more inclusive and accessible workspace for your Dress for Success program? I'm curious what you think. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see everybody. Does anyone have any comments or ideas?
This is Stephanie. This information, Lauren, is so helpful, and I'm thinking about what our client experience is, when they come into the boutique. And I think you're touching on a lot of things, that more for me, it's just things that we could do to make it, the environment itself more friendly. And for example, just being able to have clearer open walking spaces available for more than one person, when they're here with their support staff, so that it's all of these, actually a lot of little details that we didn't even think about, I think, when we were kind of putting the boutique together. And even what you were saying with regards to like the lighting, the noise factors, things like that. I just have a lot of thoughts, in terms of maybe rearranging some of how the boutique itself is laid out, so the space is a lot friendlier.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yes, that's definitely, I'm happy that it's, getting you excited to make some changes. Anybody else have anything else to add to that?
I
Yep.
just wanted to share, Lauren, I really appreciated when you explained, the importance of communicating with a, with a deaf person or a deaf-blind person, blind person, letting them know, okay, we're going to be walking through here to your left, you have this. And I think that, all of us, we could really try to do that as we service our clients. When working with individuals that are not deaf or hard of hearing or blind, we automatically have these things that we do, like we do paperwork, then we go into the boutique. But I think being aware that we really have to explain things and make sure that they feel comfortable is really important.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks for sharing. It's funny because I asked two deaf and deaf-blind people their experience, what it was like to go to Dress for Success. And both had only positive things to say. They were very excited, and so there was nothing negative about the boutique, no negative feedback. So that's really good, though. It's good that they really enjoyed their experience. But hopefully, after this training, though, it can help you get a better understanding and make, like you said, a few small changes to even improve what you already have. I have a few last couple slides.
Lauren, I just want to say also, that one of the things that was very interesting to me and so helpful was you talked about describing ourselves, to our client. And, frankly, I did not even think about that. And I think that in and of itself, could make such a huge difference in terms of helping them to understand what the experience is that's happening around them, so thank you so much for saying that, because I think we're so focused on making sure, that everything, that we're asking the right questions to meet their particular needs, and think, but we don't even think about the fact that they don't even know, who we are, what we look like, it's a lot of how you relate to people, is your first visual, impression of someone, so thank you for saying that, we'll definitely integrate that.
Sure. Yes. Yes. Deaf people, they can see, and they are quite dependent on visually what they see, but a deaf blind person though, then they can't hear, they can't see. So they really depend on you explaining what's around them, what things look like, etc. So that's important. And me too, I'm learning as well, because I see everything just fine, but now I'm learning how to communicate to a deaf blind person and what they need from me to explain. So, you know, like, so I learned how to explain my background, what I'm wearing, and I try to do that when before I start a presentation. And more people are doing that now. They're becoming more aware of doing that. So I'm happy that you're benefiting from this information. And I'll just to finish off with my last couple slides here. So I just want to give you an idea, an example of some other things. The first Starbucks store in Japan creates a deaf-friendly environment. It's really good to see. You walk in and you just feel welcome. For me, I use American Sign Language as my first language. So if I walk in, I just feel so welcome. And the person that takes my order, they can do it in sign language. They can communicate it, and I just feel right at home and welcome in that. So that's sort of the idea. Another idea is, if you notice, is adding Braille to certain things like stairs. You have that on the floor bit of the stairs, or you have the signs that also include Braille on the signs. You can even ask a deaf-blind person if there's anything that they needed to make things more accessible. Just ask them, and they will be appreciative that you ask that, and you feel like, oh, this person cares about me. So another example is a playground, and setting that up and just having it up to learn the ABCs, so kids can learn and sign to each other if there's another deaf child there. And then the deaf child will feel inclusive and, you know, be happy to play with the other kids. These are just examples of things that can be done. Now, this is a good example. Like I said, I went to Gallaudet University, which is the only deaf university in the world. And the reason I'm showing you this picture is that this building was designed to be deaf friendly, meaning that it is wide open spaces, the lighting is good. And if I'm going up the stairs, I can look down and I can see, like, my friend might be down there or someone else might be down far away, and I can talk to them from far away. We can see each other. So this is very deaf friendly, this space, and it was designed and built for that reason. And those seats, as you can see, they're in kind of a semicircle, so people can look at each other and communicate rather than being in rows. So, because then it's hard, people have to crane their neck to see each other. So in a sort of a circular, semicircular pattern. Also, there's space. People can have space to communicate. This is another idea, just examples that people have done to make the workplace more inclusive. You can put up signs that say, we know ASL. Oh, that's really cool. So the person that's deaf that walks in, then they feel welcomed and they know someone there knows sign language. Or you can just offer interpreting services, and, you know, we have an interpreter ready, and they feel welcome. Now, not everyone needs an interpreter all the time, but some people do speak, like I said, and read lips. But for me, for example, my perspective, I think that those two signs, when I see them, I think that they're really worth it. And just to let you know, coming up soon is September, which is Deaf Awareness Month. And so you can maybe learn some basic signs before then and learn about deaf culture or deaf identity. And on Google, you can find so many different resources on what you can learn. So even if you just learn just a couple basic signs, and for the deaf person, they will be impressed that you've learned something, and you'll see a smile on their face. Okay, and this one I wanted to talk to as far as emergency communication systems go. Like, knock on wood, if an emergency happens, how do you communicate with a deaf or deafblind person? So we do have assisted devices like flashing lights for fire alarms that has a strobe light attached to it, or emergency text alerts. And also sometimes you can just let everyone know that you have a deaf or deafblind consumer in the building, and so everyone is aware, so to look out for them. So if something does happen, that you can be ready to communicate with them. This is just an example. This is at a school. This is at a deaf school. And of course, they have a lot of things set up for deafs, in the deaf school, because they have deaf teachers and students, but they can see this. And these are just examples of those other ideas that can be used. There's quite a list of technology that can be used, and it just depends on which might be best for your location. And then I do have a website there. You can, I put the link on there. You can see all the various devices. So, oh yeah. So this is from your website. I got this list from your website. So I just like to know if there's anything like that has now triggered that you've come up with, and you think you want more information about deaf-blind people that you need, that you want to make them welcome, like power networking. How could you make a deaf or deafblind person feel welcome at a power networking event? I don't know, get some ideas. It's a tough question, I know. So networking, again, is deaf people value networking, like I said earlier. So if you have a training event, or just make sure that there's more than one deaf person there. Invite 5 or 6 or 7 deaf people. Have them all come together so that they can see each other and realize that they're not the only one, that there are other people there. So rather than just have one deaf person, or one deaf-blind person, or one hard of hearing person with all hearing people, they would feel very alone in that scenario. So invite other people so that they feel supported in that environment.
Lauren, we had a presentation a few months ago, and we had one of our blind clients attend. And, what we didn't do, was let our presenter know ahead of time, that we were going to have a blind client there, and, because in hindsight, we thought, oh gosh, for her experience, we should have asked for the presentation ahead of time, and just so that she could review some of the material with her support person, just be, let the presenter know so that she could be mindful about the tips, that could be, that could make it a conducive environment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a learning experience for everybody. So I'm just glad you shared that. That's definitely, there's always room for improvement. And that's why I'm sharing this specific slide, so that you can start to get ideas and be more accessible and more inclusive for the deaf and deafblind individuals. Like you said, deaf-blind people, as well as, inviting you could ask them to invite their other friends, you know, rather than be the only person or the only person in the group. That would be great if you can do that. Well, great. Thanks for
I have a
sharing that.
question. Oh, sorry. I have a question. Hi. In terms of communicating better with people that are deaf, we actually had a customer at our benefit sale. She was deaf and she pulled out her phone and just typed what she was trying to say in her notes section. So that worked, especially since we have to wear masks indoors, and she can't lip read. So that was helpful. But is there any other types of apps or things that we could download to help with communicating better on our end, in case, you know, there isn't if there isn't an interpreter that's available?
I don't know if you know about speech to text, or like I think it's in Big App or something. You speak and the phone actually puts it into captions, and then so you can just hand it, like show it to the deaf person. They would have to type, but you could speak and then it make captions of what you said. Or you also could use a clear mask. Sometimes that is helpful for the person. They can see that. I know it's kind of weird to use a clear mask, but my ASL interpreter sometimes when, you know, going to the doctor asked, you know, can you use a clear mask? And I said, yeah, that'd be nice, you know. So yeah. But you can also ask if you know, want me to use a clear mask. Maybe that person's like, no, don't bother, you know. So it just depends on the individual. But thanks for asking. Yeah, it's good to know that you tried, and you could also learn a little bit of a sign language or some finger spelling, like spell the words out. And I teach sign language too. Yeah. Sorry, just before I teach, I always say accessibility benefits everyone. It's not only benefits the deaf and deafblind people, it benefits everyone. And so now I'd just like to teach you, maybe you already know some of this, but I'll teach you the alphabet. Do you guys know the alphabet? Yes, no, a little bit rusty. So just you can go ahead and follow me. We've got A, yep. B, C. I'm going to back up. Just follow the your dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, you use your right hand. Left hand, you use your left hand. So I'm right-handed, so I use my right. But if you're left-handed, you can use your left hand. This is D. This is, yep, we're on D. F, F, F. That's F. D. We're doing D right now. D is the pointer fingers up. Yeah. E. F. G. H. G is like one finger and H is two. I and J, you draw it. Okay. L. M. N. O. P. So kind of similar to K, P is just you move your hand downward, your wrist goes downward. Then Q is similar to G, but it's face downward. R. S. T. T is also for bathroom. People use that for bathroom. Like, where's the bathroom? U. V, W, X, Y, Z. Yeah. Very good. Good job, everybody. That's a good practice. And then you can spell out words, like you can spell your name to introduce yourself. This is some basic sign. Hello. Hello. You can either wave hello or you do hello like that. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you. And then I love you. Yeah. So we have nice to meet you. Nice. No. Nice like that. Two hands together. Yeah. Yeah, they touch each other. Nice to meet. This is like two people coming together. So it's one person is coming to the other person. So nice to meet. Nice to meet you. Your name. What? So your name. What? These are very simple, basic signs so that you can learn and so you can introduce yourself to a deaf person if you feel comfortable. Don't worry about making little mistakes. They would just be happy that you've given the effort. How are you? How are you? How, like that. Yep. I know there's a lot of signs here, but these are, you can print these out as well, and you can have them up, posted up, or you can practice on your own time. These are just basic signs to communicate with a deaf or deafblind person.
Are there specific YouTube channels that you'd recommend that can teach basic signs?
There's a lot out there. If you have an app, an iPhone, you can download the ASL app. The ASL app. That one is there. You can Google, they have a dictionary there in ASL, and they have a lot of terminology on that one. So just lastly, the sign help. This is the sign help. Like, do you need help? You know, if someone comes in and said, you can sign this help. And welcome.
Was also asking if there's any ASL education sites that you recommend, Lauren.
I will share in an email after this we're done. I will share with you, I'll share with Joanna, because there's so much out there. This is quite an extensive list. There's a lot of people have set up different sites. So I can't pick just one, but I'll send you a couple that are good ones. And really, that's all. That was the end of my presentation. I want to thank everyone for your time, and I really appreciate you. Excited to learn something and make a few changes, positive changes for your consumers, for those who are deaf and deafblind and hard of hearing. So thank you too. I want to give my thanks to the interpreter as well. So are there any more questions then? Very good, Bianca. Yes, thank you, and you're welcome. Yes. Well, I look forward to hearing about people's experience when they come and visit Dress for Success. And I look forward to hearing that and hearing what you've changed. And I'm just really honored to give this presentation to you for your program.
Oh, thank you so much, Lauren and Regina, and all the volunteers, and of course the staff for joining. We're so excited to receive your resources, Lauren. So excited to share them with the volunteers. There's a few volunteers that couldn't make it today, and one of our staff members also. So this presentation was being recorded, so we will be sharing it, and hopefully we can rewatch it, and we will definitely take all of your tips, and we're excited to work with you in the future.
Yes, yes, feel free to contact me by email anytime. And maybe one day I can come by and have a look and check out your space.
Please do.
Thank you.
We would love to have you. This was so helpful. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.